I wasn't invited to a single one of their weddings. Not as a bridesmaid. Not even as a guest. For years, I smiled at their photos, liked their posts, and swallowed the feeling that maybe I just wasn't worth including. They were my cousins. My so-called best friends. And when my engagement went public, they barely even reacted. Until one tiny detail about my upcoming wedding leaked, and suddenly, my inbox exploded. People I hadn't heard from in years wanted to reconnect. Some asked if they could bring a +1, even though they ignored every invite I ever sent. I should have been flattered. I should have felt like I was finally part of the group. But instead, I felt something else. Something darker. Because my wedding wasn't just a wedding. Not to me. Not to my family. Definitely not to the ones who once shut me out. They thought it was about love. About vows. About cake and music and overpriced centerpieces. They had no idea what I was really planning. And by the time they showed up, it was already too late. You want to know what changed? Why the same people who rejected me were suddenly falling over themselves to be there? Well, it all started with a name on the guest list. One name that made everything unravel. His name was Julian Thorne. And he wasn't just any guest. He was the key. The reason my cousins, especially Amelia, the ringleader of their little clique, were suddenly so eager to attend. Amelia, who'd married into absurd wealth and spent her days documenting her perfect, organic, locally sourced life on Instagram. Amelia, who wouldn't have given me the time of day a month ago. Now, she was messaging me about dress codes and dietary restrictions. Julian Thorne. The name echoed in my mind, a dark melody against the constant chirping of wedding planning notifications. He was a reclusive artist, rumored to be eccentric, brilliant, and fabulously wealthy. The kind of man who usually avoided social gatherings like the plague. The kind of man Amelia and her crew desperately wanted to impress. I'd met him once, years ago, at a gallery opening. He'd been quiet, intense, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He'd barely spoken to anyone, but he'd lingered near me, studying one of my photographs. A simple black and white shot of a wilting rose. He'd said nothing, but his gaze had felt heavy, knowing. Like he'd seen something in that photo that I hadn't even realized I'd captured. Now, his name was on my guest list. Not because he was a friend, not because I particularly wanted him there. He was a pawn. A necessary piece in the game I was playing. The invitations had been carefully crafted. Thick, creamy cardstock, elegant calligraphy. A subtle hint of old money, even though my family was anything but. The location, my grandmother's crumbling estate on the coast. A place filled with more shadows than sunlight, more memories than joy. It was the perfect setting. Isolated. Atmospheric. A stage for the drama that was about to unfold. The RSVPs started pouring in. Yes, yes, yes. A chorus of affirmations that felt less like celebration and more like a slow, creeping dread. Each yes was another weight on my chest, another knot in my stomach. My fiancé, Daniel, seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. He was caught up in the whirlwind of wedding preparations, happily ticking off items on his meticulously crafted spreadsheet. He'd even color-coded it. God, I loved him. His naive optimism, his unwavering belief in the goodness of people. It was endearing and terrifying. He had no idea what I was capable of. What I was about to do. "Are you okay?" he asked one evening, finding me staring out the window at the darkening sky. The ocean was a restless gray expanse, mirroring the turmoil inside me. "Just tired," I murmured, forcing a smile. All this planning is exhausting. He kissed my forehead, his touch light and reassuring. It'll all be worth it, he said. Just imagine, in a few weeks, we'll be husband and wife. Husband and wife. The words felt hollow, like a promise I knew I couldn't keep. Not in the way he imagined. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of activity. Florists, caterers, dress fittings. A constant stream of well-wishers, their faces a mixture of genuine excitement and thinly veiled curiosity about Julian Thorne. They whispered about him at every opportunity, their voices hushed with a mixture of awe and apprehension. I played my part perfectly. The blushing bride, radiant with happiness. I let them believe what they wanted to believe. Let them think I was finally one of them. Let them think I was happy. But every night, as I lay in bed next to Daniel, I felt the darkness closing in. The weight of my secrets pressing down on me. The ghosts of the past whispering in my ear. The estate was slowly coming back to life. Dust-covered furniture was polished to a gleam. Wilting gardens were revived with bursts of color. The grand ballroom, where my grandmother had once hosted lavish parties, was transformed into a fairy tale setting. But beneath the surface of beauty and celebration, a different kind of transformation was taking place. A slow, insidious corruption. I started seeing things. Flickering shadows in the corners of my eyes. Hearing whispers when no one was there. My dreams were filled with distorted images of the past, twisted memories of laughter and betrayal. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, caught in a web of my own making. One afternoon, while exploring the dusty attic of the estate, I stumbled upon a box of old photographs. Images of my grandmother, young and vibrant, surrounded by her friends. The same cousins who had ostracized me. Their smiles were bright, their eyes full of mischief. But as I looked closer, I noticed something unsettling. A subtle shift in their expressions, a flicker of something cold and calculating beneath the surface of their joy. It was the same look I'd seen in Julian Thorne's eyes. A look that made me shiver. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those photographs, those smiling faces that now seemed to mock me. I got out of bed and went to the window. The ocean was a churning black mass, the waves crashing against the rocks below. The wind howled, a mournful sound that echoed the emptiness inside me. I knew I couldn't turn back. I'd set the wheels in motion, and now, there was no stopping them. The wedding was just days away. And with each passing hour, the darkness grew stronger, the secrets more suffocating. Julian Thorne was coming. And when he arrived, everything would change. The day Julian Thorne arrived, the air at the estate crackled with a strange energy. It was a clear, bright day, the kind that usually brought a sense of peace. But the sunlight felt sharp, almost accusatory, as if it were exposing the lies and secrets that clung to the old house like cobwebs. I saw his car pull up the long, winding driveway, a vintage Rolls-Royce, gleaming black against the lush green of the overgrown lawns. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the rising tide of anxiety. He stepped out of the car, tall and imposing, his presence immediately commanding attention. He hadn't changed much. The same intense eyes, the same air of quiet power. He wore a simple black suit, but it hung on him with an effortless elegance that spoke of wealth and privilege. He looked like he belonged in a different world, a world of art galleries and private auctions, not here, amidst the crumbling grandeur of my grandmother's estate. My cousins, predictably, flocked to him like moths to a flame. Amelia, in particular, was practically radiating eagerness, her perfectly manicured hand fluttering near his arm as she showered him with compliments. I watched them from a distance, a strange detachment settling over me. It was as if I were watching a play unfold, the characters moving through their predetermined roles. He acknowledged their greetings with a polite but distant nod, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. And then, his eyes met mine. Across the crowded courtyard, our gazes locked. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent. The chattering guests, the chirping birds, the crashing waves, all faded into the background. It was just him and me, connected by an unspoken understanding. A shared secret. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, and then turned his attention back to Amelia. The moment was gone, but the intensity of his gaze lingered, a burning ember in the pit of my stomach. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden presence, every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps approaching. I lay in bed next to Daniel, his steady breathing a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my own heart. He reached out and took my hand, his touch warm and comforting. "You're cold," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Are you all right?" "Just a bad dream," I whispered, forcing a smile. But the truth was, I wasn't sure where the dream ended and reality began. The next few days were a whirlwind of final preparations. The estate was buzzing with activity, the arrival of more guests adding to the growing sense of anticipation. My cousins were in their element, flitting around like social butterflies, their laughter echoing through the halls. They treated me with a newfound respect, their earlier indifference replaced by a strange mixture of deference and curiosity. They wanted to know everything about Julian Thorne, every detail of our supposed friendship. I fed them carefully crafted lies, watching as their eyes widened with fascination and envy. But beneath the surface of their excitement, I sensed a growing unease. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if the house itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. One evening, I found myself alone in the library, surrounded by the dusty volumes that had belonged to my grandmother. I was searching for a particular book, a collection of local folklore and legends, when I heard a noise behind me. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat, but the room was empty. I dismissed it as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched persisted, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. As I reached for the book I'd been searching for, a small, leather-bound diary slipped from the shelf and fell to the floor. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the worn cover. It was my grandmother's diary. I'd never seen it before. I hesitated for a moment, a strange reluctance holding me back. But the curiosity was too strong. I opened the diary, my eyes scanning the faded ink. The entries were cryptic, filled with strange symbols and coded messages. I couldn't understand most of it, but certain phrases jumped out at me. The obsidian eye, the gathering, the reckoning. The words resonated with a chilling familiarity, echoing the whispers I'd been hearing in my dreams. As I turned the pages, a small, dried flower fell out. A wilting rose, identical to the one in the photograph that had captivated Julian Thorne years ago. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The photographs in the attic, the strange looks in my cousin's eyes, Julian Thorne's intense gaze, the whispers in the night. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a ritual. A gathering of something ancient and dark. And I was the bait. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stumbled back, the diary falling from my hands, the dried rose scattering into dust. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a chilling premonition of what was to come. I had to get out. I had to warn Daniel. But as I turned to leave the library, I saw him standing in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. He was holding the box of old photographs I'd found in the attic. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are these people?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to tell him everything, to explain the twisted game I'd been playing, but I knew it was too late. He wouldn't believe me. He couldn't believe me. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the photographs. "They look familiar," he murmured, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I feel like I've seen them before. In a dream." He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "What's going on? Your name?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What have you gotten us into?" I reached out to him, my hand trembling. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "I can explain." But before I could say another word, a figure emerged from the shadows behind him. Julian Thorne. His eyes were like chips of obsidian, cold and hard. He smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent shivers down my spine. "I believe," he said, his voice smooth and chilling, "that it's time for the ceremony to begin." Julian's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. Daniel turned, his eyes widening in fear as he took in Julian's imposing figure. He looked back at me, his expression a mixture of confusion and betrayal. He opened his mouth to speak, but Julian silenced him with a raised hand. "You misunderstand," Julian said, his voice still smooth, but with an underlying edge of steel. "This isn't her wedding. It's ours." He gestured towards my cousins, who had silently entered the library, their faces pale, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. They formed a circle around us, their movements eerily synchronized. I recognized the look in their eyes. The same look I'd seen in the old photographs. The look of the obsidian eye. Then, it all came crashing down on me. The whispers, the dreams, the strange symbols in my grandmother's diary. They weren't just random occurrences. They were pieces of a puzzle that was now falling into place with terrifying clarity. My family, my bloodline, was tainted. Bound to an ancient entity, the obsidian eye, a being of immense power and darkness. And the wedding, the gathering, was the culmination of a centuries-old ritual. A ritual meant to renew their pact with this entity, to strengthen its hold on their lives, their souls. And I, the last descendant, the unwitting heir to this cursed legacy, was the sacrifice. Daniel, bless his heart, still didn't fully understand. He looked from Julian to my cousins, his face etched with disbelief. He tried to speak, to reason with them, but his words were lost in the growing darkness that seemed to emanate from the circle. Julian began to chant, his voice low and guttural, the words ancient and unsettling. My cousins joined in, their voices rising in a chilling crescendo. The air grew thick, heavy, making it hard to breathe. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in on us. I felt a cold hand grip my heart, squeezing the life out of me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable. I thought of Daniel, of his kind eyes, his gentle touch. I thought of the life we could have had, a life free from the shadows of my family's past. Tears streamed down my face, hot against my cold skin. But then, something shifted. The chanting faltered, the air crackled with a different kind of energy. I opened my eyes and saw Julian staring at me, his expression no longer cold and calculating, but filled with a strange mixture of confusion and fear. He looked down at his hands, his fingers twitching. The chanting stopped completely. My cousins looked at each other, their eyes wide with panic. Something was wrong. The ritual wasn't working. Then, I understood. The wilting rose. The photograph that had captivated Julian all those years ago. It wasn't just a pretty picture. It was a symbol. A symbol of defiance. Of decay. Of the natural cycle of life and death. A symbol that rejected the obsidian eye's promise of eternal life, of power at the cost of one's soul. I had unknowingly woven that symbol into the very fabric of the wedding, into the decorations, the invitations, even the dress I was wearing. It was everywhere. A silent rebellion against the darkness that had consumed my family for generations. And it was working. The obsidian eye, it seemed, couldn't tolerate the presence of such a potent symbol of mortality. Its power was waning, its grip on my cousins loosening. They stumbled back, their faces contorted in pain, as the darkness began to recede. Julian, however, was different. He was stronger, more deeply connected to the entity. He fought against the receding darkness, his eyes burning with a desperate fury. He lunged towards me, his hand outstretched, his fingers grasping for my throat. But I was ready. I had been preparing for this moment, consciously or not, my whole life. I stepped aside, letting his momentum carry him forward. He stumbled, his balance broken, and fell to the floor, his body convulsing as the last vestiges of the obsidian eye's power left him. The room was silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of my cousins, who now looked at me with a mixture of awe and terror. They were free. But at what cost? I looked down at Julian, his body still and lifeless. And then, I looked at Daniel, who stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. He had witnessed everything. The ritual, the darkness, the power. And he had seen me, the woman he loved, at the center of it all. I reached out to him, my hand trembling. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I can explain." He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. And then, he did something unexpected. He took my hand. His touch was hesitant, but firm. "I know," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I saw." He pulled me close, holding me tight. And in that embrace, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known I was capable of. The darkness was gone. The secrets were out. And somehow, miraculously, we were still together. The wedding, of course, never happened. The estate was sold, the memories and the shadows left behind. My cousins scattered, trying to rebuild their lives, haunted by the echoes of the past. Daniel and I left the coast, seeking a new beginning, a life free from the weight of my family's legacy. We didn't talk much about what had happened. Some wounds, we knew, were too deep to heal with words. But we had each other. And in the quiet moments, in the shared silences, we found a different kind of understanding. A bond forged not in happiness and light, but in darkness and survival. We had faced the abyss together, and somehow, we had emerged, scarred but whole. And that, I realized, was a kind of love story in itself. It's strange, the things you remember. Not the grand pronouncements, the dramatic gestures, but the small details. The way Daniel's hand felt in mine, the strength of his grip as we walked away from that crumbling estate, leaving behind generations of shadows. I remember the silence in the car as we drove away, a silence filled with unspoken questions and a shared understanding that transcended words. The world felt different, sharper, the colors more vibrant, as if a veil had been lifted. We were starting over, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and the love in our hearts. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd once envisioned, but it was real. It was ours. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when the memories threaten to overwhelm me, I think of that wilting rose. A symbol of decay, yes, but also of resilience. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, life finds a way. A reminder that even the most carefully constructed illusions can be shattered by the simple truth. If you enjoyed this descent into the heart of a family's dark secret, and the unexpected twist that rewrote their destiny, then you'll love the other stories waiting to be unveiled on this channel. Subscribe now, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next chilling tale. The shadows are long, and the stories are many. Join us, if you dare, as we explore the hidden corners of the human heart, one story at a time.